Hello and welcome back to our real-time GPU Raytracing deep dive session with Autodesk VRED 2021. Again, you might know me from part number 1. My name is Simon Nagel, and also welcome to my colleague.
Tierney here, yeah.
Hey Danny, good to see you here. So, in the first session, we mainly talked about the theoretical part about GPU Raytracing. In general, what's the difference to a CPU, but also how it's implemented into VRED, what the scaling with multiple GPUs is like, what is the difference between CPU and GPU Raytracing. But the good thing is that we actually have one GPU cluster at hand. So in Danny's home office right now, we have a GPU cluster consisting of a head node with one RTX 8000 card, which is mainly used for the denoising. And this has a 10-bit or 10 gigabit connection to the little cluster itself, which has 8 RTX 8000 GPU cards in there. And Danny, I'm really excited and looking forward to you now showing this cluster in action.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for the introduction, Simon. And like you said before, welcome to part 2 of the GPU Raytracing deep dive. I just, on cue, as if we'd practiced this, I opened up the cluster manager here. So this is actually the listing of the 8 RTX 8000 GPUs in this RTX server. So just going to close that over here now. And first thing, I'm just going to move in and out of the model. Just in real time, we do have some prepared camera flights, but just to give you a sense of the resolution here, it's 1892 by 808. So it's not exactly full HD, just to be completely transparent about that. And what I want to do is give you a sense of, how big the model is. We're not trimming anything. We're not reducing, optimizing. So we have 220 million polygons, triangles in the entire scene. I think if I actually go and put on my statistics now, you'll see that we've around 120, in this camera view, 120 million rendered polygons. So just being completely transparent there, it's a very complicated, complex data set, which is really going to push the performance of the cluster here. So I'm going to move in.
Oh, sorry, Danny, just one thing to mention, then I think we said it in the first video. I mean, this model is not from us. It's actually a real-world customer set. It's Porsche, obviously, so it comes from Porsche. So it's a data set which was prepared by the customer, and we assume that multiple customers are using similar data sets that are equally complex in data size and polygon count.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a truly beautiful data set. And I'm just rotating around the front lamp here. I've got some variants here that I'd like to cycle through, but I'm trying to leave it in full resolution as much as I can. So there's an autofocus script here that's available on GitHub if you want to use it. And it's a really quite a sleek quite an easy script. But just as you see, the background is being blurred. And once I move out of the center of focus, then whatever's in the center of the screen, basically the center of the camera, will be in focus. Everything outside of that automatically gets a blur. So if I just move the car back in, you see that the front lamp and all the details are then in focus. Another thing I could do is I can completely turn this off and you see everything is sharp. But what I'd like to do is maybe just turn on the lights here. So I'm going to turn on the front lights. You don't see me clicking within the screen. I'm just using the VRED app in a web browser just to keep some of the clutter out of my desktop. And there was a couple of things we saw in the theory presentation within the PowerPoint that we've already gone over. So it'll be quite interesting. Obviously, to think that with medium anti-aliasing, the lamp will be completely rendered in full quality. I think that's a bit optimistic. So something as calculation intensive as this area here would need still frame anti-aliasing to reach its desired sampling quality. It was nice just to be able to show that, and it gives you a really good sense.
You were just mentioning real-time anti-aliasing. Could you just show briefly the settings of the anti-aliasing? I think you mentioned it, but yeah, we're using medium anti-aliasing, and you're totally right. I mean, just having the front light on and medium anti-aliasing doesn't give you the perfectly smooth image of the headlight. But nevertheless, I think it's still possible to understand the light in motion. So if you navigate around, you can see the light distribution and also on how the light is rendered itself in full motion. But I mean, no discussion about that. If we really want to make a completely perfect light analysis, we just need more samples and not just only an interactive review with medium anti-aliasing, unless we would probably use more than these 8 nodes right now.
Yeah, thanks for that, Simon. I'm just, again, with the point of being completely transparent here, I'm just going to go through some of the render settings so that you can actually see the ray tracing quality. So here with interactive, so real time and still frame, we've got full GI on. In the general settings here, I'm using 8 image samples. Maybe I can bump that up to 64. And if I just click on my render window now, you'll see how quickly it reaches these 64 samples anyway. I think just for the sake of prudence, I'm going to turn the denoiser off just so you get a sense of what the image looks like. And then I'll turn off my anti-aliasing completely. So this is running at, 30, maybe upwards of 30 frames. So it's running in real time, but it's very noisy. This is standard for a ray tracer. Turn on medium anti-aliasing. I get a lower frame rate slightly, still noise. And then with the denoiser on, just turn this on. And from the last session, the denoiser is running on my master computer now. It's an RTX card, which is solely doing the denoising of the image. The other 8 in the server are rendering the pixels here that are being sent to the master, which is then subsequently being denoised. So that's for the sake of transparency, just to show where we're at and what kind of performance we can expect.
And also, sorry, Danny, but I think the question often came up, what was the performance of the video? How many cards did you use? I think we gave one part of the answer already. So for exterior shots, we can see right now that we can achieve real-time frame rates interactively with medium anti-aliasing. So if Danny is navigating around with a medium anti-aliasing with a full HD image, and at the very moment we're achieving frame rates which are obviously real-time. So I think for an exterior, 8 GPUs for our scenario were fine to create these images. For the interior, we will talk about this in a couple minutes. We needed to also use the same settings. So we used anti-aliasing, we used real-time, we used real-time capturing, but I think we fast-forwarded some shots for the sake of performance. So we originally wanted to have 4 clusters. So the plan was to ship 4 clusters to Munich for the AIF, which is our largest event in the year. But obviously, due to the corona crisis, the event never took place. And so we still wanted to showcase you as customers how it would look like when using multiple GPUs together. Since we just had the 8 GPUs, we could only show the 8 GPUs for the exterior live, and we used the same GPUs for the interior review. And as I just said, we fast forwarded the image later on for the video.
Yeah, it seems like we're complaining about having 8 RTX 8000 cards. Don't mistake us, we're not. But you're completely correct about that, Simon. But just in terms of where does the render power go here to render the image? Obviously, the exterior of the car, the lacquer is in this case quite easy to render because it's slightly metallic, but not overly challenging with flakes. But then, of course, if you move into the lights, the interior, these are harder to render because there's a lot more information that's going on in them. So I just wanted to show the cost visualization.
Yeah, this really extremes to optimize the rendering because, I mean, rendering is not rendering. And for this particular data set, we noticed that the headlights are taking some frames away. So if we would just put a plastic material on the headlights, we probably would achieve a couple of frames more in the rendering. So the more complex shaders we have in our rendering, the slower the rendering is going to be. So it's really hard to say that a common data set has a certain frame rate. It really highly depends on the data and on the shading quality that you want to achieve.
Everything that we say about this is based on this data set, plus or minus a couple of examples, customer examples, but every data set is different, of course. So we can't have a general sweeping statement saying that if you put this in this scene with this amount of graphic power and these materials that you will get this frame rate. Absolutely, completely impossible to do. And I think most people understand that. Just want to go in and we're trying to recreate the video that we did here as live as possible. So I remember one of the camera angles was like this, and then I can just move up into my Felgen or rims variants and just move in here and get some really nice perspective here. Go into the other 20-inch rims. And of course the hero rims, I suppose, of the Mission E with the matching lacquer. Speaking of lacquer, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but let's say we were to change this to just a nice black, and you see the rim itself, the color changes. And of course, changing the colors is instantaneous here anyway.
And this really shows the beauty of full GI rendering, because of course we could make all the variants also possible for OpenGL, but in this case we would kind of need to pre-calculate all the shadow behavior. We would not see the correct reflection on the rims. We would not see the brushed metal of the brake disc in the way that we see it right now. So full global illumination is just offering us a completely new level of realism. If we just compare to the artificial and gamey look of OpenGL.
Yeah, I mean the variations here. I mean there are geometric variations. So for example, this is the standard entry level version. And of course, I'm changing geometry like the air intakes here, the aerodynamics. So it would be very difficult to get physically correct without a huge amount of work in OpenGL. Some would argue that it's actually just because the render technology is so different, it's impossible to do. So yeah, just going to activate another camera view here. And we're going to move in and see, I think what Simon showed in the last video was this WIDed ray tracing, which is a part of ray tracing, of course, where you actually get reflections and refractions of geometries with and in of themselves. So you might hear the cluster bumping up in the background. That's actually in the same room as me, so it's not noise dampened. So if you do hear some background noise, that's the cluster just doing its beautiful stuff. So I can rotate around here, but also, of course, I get the shadows on top of the ray tracing effect. And again, I really like this effect. Hate going to repeat myself, but for example, if I turn on the autofocus here, I can get some really nice effects. So you can see the background completely blurred here. And as I move into the wing mirror and then move across, you'll see the wing mirror then gets out of focus and the background comes back in. So just a nice way of interacting with the product. So I'm just going to turn that off there. I'm going to move into the rear of the car. And this is one of the hero shots that really impressed us. Not just in terms of the form of the car, just the way you can fly over this complex geometry, highly tessellated. Again, 220 million polygons. We'll show this at a different stage, but this is, for example, the rear light we can toggle on and off. You can see how it emanates from the center of the car, not just showing the actual light design itself, but also highlighting certain aspects. For example, the Porsche shrift or logos here. And of course, if we allow that to render up, we're there in less than a second and a half or so. I'm just going to turn this light off and move over to a different part of the car. So let's zoom out and get an overall 3/4 rear design flight here. And now we're going to start moving into the interior, and this is where it gets really interesting. You might hear a little peep out of the cluster here because it's doing a little bit more work. First things first, I'm going to just open the door because we can't get in the door if it's not open. And then we're just going to zoom into the interior now.
Danny, would you mind just to go back to the viewpoint before, because I think that's also quite important, maybe just to stay a little bit longer over here. If you open and close the doors, we actually just saw also the behavior of, or the effect of the door to the surrounding area. So if you would just close the door again, you can actually see that the shadows are changing, that the reflection is visible at the same time. So we can really see the effect of the door in combination to the environment. You're changing the focal length also in parallel. That's an interesting effect. So again, if we would like to pre-stage this in the way as we usually have to do with computer graphics quality and in OpenGL, this, of course, it's somehow possible, but it really takes a longer time. And here we get an instant result in full GI without having the need to prepare the data.
I would completely argue that it's not possible to get this, for example, this soft shadow in the gaps where the door is open. it's just not possible. Global illumination is designed particularly for that, and yeah, it just happens automatically. Really, once you've got the scene set up, really getting the feel of the gaps in the car. I think that's pretty cool. So, Simon, I'm going to open that door again.
Yeah, go for it.
Going to move in, and then just move into the interior of the car. So now you can see the car being rendered in full global illumination. And this is where we see a frame drop. Let's be honest. Let's be positively optimistic, but we're definitely going to see a frame drop here. First reason is we're rendering more of the screen. We're rendering more of the car. And we're also in an enclosed space where we have a lot of bounces of light. Plus, we also have in the interior lighting the scene, additional lights. As you can see here, this is it completely neutrally lit from the environment. So it's quite dark, but then I turn these lights on that are set up throughout the car, and that will obviously change how the car is looking. For example, I can change the roof now is no panorama roof anymore.
It's perfect. It was perfectly visible, the changes on the geometry itself.
Yeah, so exactly. So more light coming in. Obviously, the more influence it will have on the general layout of the car. So if I turn that off, and again, this is something you simply would not be able to achieve with another type of rendering.
Yeah, and also just one side comment over here. I mean, it's great that the Porsche Taycan is a car with an interior and an exterior, because quite often if we just look at different benchmarks, we quite often just see a convertible car. And of course, a convertible car, more or less only from a rendering point of view, has an exterior, because you don't have so much interior light bouncing going on. So of course, just having a convertible car, it's quite easy and quite faster to render than the interior of a normal car. And again, just one comment, I think we mentioned it earlier already. So in the interior right now, we have about 5 frames per second. So if you have seen actually a smoother movement in the video, as I said earlier, we fast forwarded the video because we wanted to achieve a similar effect that we would have got if we would be able to have all the clusters available that we wanted to get for the AF, which did not take place for the Corona crisis.
Yeah, for sure. I think as a kind of a rule of thumb, in a way, if you want to see if there's a little bit of cheating going on, generally people show the pure exterior of a car or a convertible. A closed interior is the ultimate benchmark, I guess. So that's why you're going to see a drop in frame rate here. But still, completely interactive in my mind. And then rendering up to the full samples, just incredibly quick. So I'm going to move into this overall view of the car here. So classic view, looking from the the passenger seat. And we're able to pan around and move in. And then once we let the image settle up, the denoiser will kick in and start rendering up the script. The signatures Turbo S stitched into the seats. I mean, I think we mentioned it before the data set's incredible, absolutely stunning. And of course, fully interactive. I can change, for example, the overall layout of the car, different seats if I wanted. But I'm just going to go in and check if I can change some of the materials. So we're going to go into full leather, full black leather with a nice gloss. Just incredible details. We'll show this at a later stage. We're going to stay pretty interactive with all of this. So I want to move into, this variation here. So obviously we've got different packages that are deliverable or available with the Taycan. So based on this kind of red leather interior, you'll have this type of a button here, but I quite like this variation here. You really get to see a different material and the effect, and you can actually see through the buttons here. So it's got this kind of floating button design here. And again, rendering that in a good performance. I mean, yeah.
It's also quite amazing from my point of view. If you change the leather color to the Bordeaux red, you actually see the reflections on it, on the chrome parts or on the metal parts in front. So this is something that you probably wouldn't be aware if you are not using this the reflection combination with the GI.
Yeah, I mean, materials live not just from the lighting and the environment around them, but also the materials that are close to them, or maybe you didn't think that they were going to have effect on them. So this kind of bleeding, color bleeding or indirect illumination or just pure reflection can really change the sense of what kind of material, what kind of effect it's having on the interior. So you're going to move into this little clock here, and allow that just to render up. For this, I'm going to change the material ever so slightly and just allow this digital analog display to light up. So again, we're using a little bit of depth of field here. I just zoom in. Not only are you evaluating the clock, but this really, really cool design pattern here. It's probably done with something like generative design. Again, allow that to render up. Just let go of the mouse, and optimistically, that's going to be rendered in less than 2 seconds. So I'm going to spring to the central console here. Close the door for this example here, and then just zoom into this, and we can see the entire digital display, this kind of half horizontal, half vertical digital display. And also, this is quite a nice little feature where you get this spot here where you can actually look through what used to be the transmission tunnel in non-electric cars. And of course, this can all be designed using HMI design, so HTML or a Qt design interface. So it doesn't have to be static, it can be completely interactive as well. You can see the roof here, again, not to get too into it, but the roof, once we close that, then you'll see the effect of the light on that as well.
Danny, you were just mentioning the effect of the HMI, that it's static or interactive. So by interactive, you mean that you can actually press on the buttons, and the buttons would have an influence on the HMI itself. So you could change the behavior of the HMI. But I guess that interactive also means you could press on the button and you could probably change the behavior in the car. So for example, you could change the ambient lighting, for example, or you could change the GPS system and so forth and so on. So this is what you mean by interactive. And then just, I guess in full GI, if we use the HMI as an emissive light source, so if everything else would be dark, so it would emit also light into the scene, right? So even if we would change interactively the HMI, we would also see the lighting effect of our display, of our different displays directly rendered in real time in the car, which also must be pretty amazing effect.
Yeah, I mean, there's two components to that definitely aren't mutually exclusive, but one is the actual effect of the lighting, the ambience in the car from a digital display or an ambient light source itself, but also the effect of the lit surface on the reflection. So you could actually do some early ergonomics tests to see if a display is too bright and is too highly reflective in a nighttime situation on the side glass or the windscreen itself. So it's quite a lot of use cases for this, for the physically correct aspect of it. Oh, I skipped a stage there. Just 1 second. So now we go into the interior, and I'm just going to change the environment here very quickly. And we're going to make this the street environment again, completely different lighting situation. Turn the lights on, and here, of course, I can change. Let's go to frozen blue. And then we'll change another material combination. Myself and Simon have argued over this quite a bit. I'm a big fan of this kind of Gulf oil baby boy blue. So it's called frozen blue, and I love the red and black leather interior. Simon, I think yours is more conservative.
Yeah, probably. In this case, I'm a bit more conservative. So I actually like the Schwarz-Kreide and the Dolomiti silver. It's just that's my favorite, but I guess it's a very personal opinion.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to do that for you because this is my show. But yeah, anyway, this would be a classic way of configuring your interior. In the video, we saw that we were, in the video and the presentation, we were talking about perceived quality, reflection, gap analysis, these kind of things. And this is something you can see the performance running here extremely quickly. So we're able to check the viability of surfaces and change different tolerances. We could model these with different tolerances, and depending on the material that we selected, it will have a different effect on what the customer perceives as quality in the gaps. So you can
Yeah,
just see the slight door.
that's a great example, actually, seeing the difference between a white car paint and a dark car paint.
Yeah.
And well, actually, to really see this effect, it's probably, I would say, only possible in GI, because you really not only have the correct reflections, you also have the behavior of light bouncing between gaps, and you need to judge gaps in motion. So you have to rotate around, move around, and see the different behavior of light on the beveled edges, on the curves, to really make a decision on how the gaps should be built in a car.
I mean, the rule of thumb for perceived quality is if you want to increase the perceived quality without increasing your tooling costs or your manufacturing precision, just make everything black. And if you make everything black, make it matte as much as possible. The mistakes don't come across, but that's not where we're at in car design. We want to offer the customer as many high quality materials as possible. So I'm just opening the door here as well, just to see not just the effect of, a static analysis, but what happens when I open the door? Where does the gap go? Where does the shadow run along? How does the light run across the material? So, yeah. Now, next one, I'm going to move over to a different type of car lacquer here. So it's just the uni lacquer. You'll see this is rendering completely in real time. We've got 30 frames, over 30 frames a second. And this is, I don't even know what we call this. We would call this a tank deckel in German. We would call this a fuel cap. But there's no fuel in this car because it's electric. So we're just going to call it the electric cap or electro cap. We just found a new word here. And there are some variations here. This is the mechanical opening right here. This is the electric opening where you just swipe your hand across. You don't even need to touch it. And then it opens. And you can see the effect of the lights here. I think I'm going to change again the color because white is quite a challenging color itself. And this is where you really see an effect of the shadowing in the gaps. And again, open the door here and you see how the reflection and this kind of pronounced hip line or formed surface runs across the car, and how it works not just in a static position but when the door opens and closes, and the line welds together almost seamlessly, and that's really quite beautiful. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to move to the front of the car. So this is where you would put your luggage, and I'm going to animate this as well. First, I'm just going to show you where it is. So it's right at the front light here. Just animate around here, and now I'm going to open this. So now we see the effect of the light running across the surface. You can even zoom out a little bit more, take a higher angle. Close the lid, and then again we're going to do this test with a little bit of white because it's really the most challenging to do, and then you'll really see the effect of the gaps within the car. Excellent. So the last exterior part of the car we're talking about lighting a lot and physically correct lighting. So I've set up this little scene here where, we've got a very basic light on in the car, just lighting up the right hand side of the car. So now I'm going to turn on the front lamp, allow that to render up. And it's going to take a little while because it's one of two light sources in the scene. You can see that it's actually lighting up the ground once I let that render. I'll just turn that off again, and I'm going to start turning on individual lights here. So we've got this kind of a light studio. So if I turn on my individual lights, so 1, 2, 3, I'll zoom out so you can see each individual light coming on. 4, 5, move around the other side so you can see the lights on the other side. 6. So we've got about 12 lights in the scene, completely lighting the car. Really, really nice environment here. And I'm just going to let that render up because I class it as one of our hero shots for sure. The interior is lit, the exterior is lit, and within a matter of 2 seconds, you've got a fully beautiful shot that could be used for design evaluation, engineering evaluation, but also used for marketing.
Yeah, from a technical point of view, I think it's also quite important that we don't use an HDR right now. I mean, there is a bit of, but mainly the entire image is just lit by the different light sources and the indirect lighting, which is produced by the car, but also by the hole killer, which is a German word for the photographer's equipment in the background.
Yes, this kind of rounded floor, yeah.
Yeah, which is throwing more light into the back of the car due to the reflection of that part, yeah.
Yeah. Again, we can put on our autofocus, but I don't want to over-exaggerate it now.
Danny, could you just move one of the light sources away? Is it possible in your scene, just to show how interactive it is?
Sure.
So let's just say...
So if I take... I'm going to take the front light here. So this is a little ARRI light. So it's a studio film light here. Just need to make sure I've got the correct one selected.
So it's even a light from a side light that you can really get in the real world, right? So there's
from a manufacturer, yeah.
Okay.
Of course, yeah. And then I can transfer this up or down, and you can see the effect of it immediately. Or I could put wheels on it and have it move around the car. And you can see the effect of that.
Okay, cool. So it could be even scripted that it would follow the camera and would move to a certain parameter if you want to. Okay.
Absolutely. No problems with that whatsoever. And you see there that the scene's not compiled whatsoever. It's
just another side note. I mean, it's not really, you wouldn't do this in a real scene, but I guess you could just take part of the car and move it, right? So
yeah, sure. I don't want to destroy the intent of the car here, but let's just say we're going to, let's just be cheeky and let's say we're going to take this rim and we can move it completely, and because the shadow's not pre-calculated, I can zoom in here, get a real sense of detail.
Okay, but technically we could just grab every part of the car and move it away and still see the behavior of the full GR rendering.
Absolutely, but I'm not going to start making changes to Porsche's wonderful design. I presume they know what they're doing.
I would never ask you to, no.
Again, the rear light toggle, really, really beautiful effect here. And I love that. Really, really love that. So what I'm going to do is get a little bit more interactive. You can see the light turning off when we move into this scene. And what I want to do is select some lights. So these light planes here, and I'm going to turn these on. Now what I can do is, not only are these lights casting a shadow and lighting the scene, but they're also completely dynamic and completely movable. I think we showed this in the video as well. It's 4 planes that are invisible to the camera here, but visible to reflection and also have an influence on the shadow of the car. I could rotate them, I could animate them, do surface analysis with them, move in here, see the effect of this kind of semi-concave surface and how the lines then come together. Or we could go one further and we could bring it into, firstly I'm going to turn these lights off, bring it into the light tunnel. So the light tunnel is actually a dynamically rendered HDR image which allows us to evaluate the surface continuity of the car.
Well, what do you mean? What do you mean by dynamically rendered HDR image? Is it like an animated HDR or is it a switch?
It's a series of animated HDRs that are through the scene. I mean, you could do this with light planes, like I just showed previously. You could use something like HDR Light Studio to create area lights using the tungsten plugin for VRED. There's many ways to skin a cat. There's many ways to achieve this effect. But this is just one of the examples. We wanted to show a series of different ways of lighting and illuminating the car. And because a car is never really static, it really lives from the dynamism. We thought that this was a relevant way of showing that. So again, I can move into the lights here and I can turn the front lights on or off. And then I think one of my favorite cameras is. I just need to open the camera editor here. And this is one of the hero shots that Simon prepared, and this is called Taikan Swift.
Oh, yeah. We have to put the rear lights on.
Put the rear lights on, for sure. We'll just do that now. Rear light toggle. Put the rear lights on.
Ah, and you activated the glow already. Perfect.
Yeah, I can turn the glow off if I want. If it disturbs, I can stop the animation. I can start the animation, as you can see. I'm not a big fan of glow, as you know, so I'm just going to turn that off. It's more of an emotional effect rather than physically correct, but I mean, a lot of people use it just to accentuate.
I'm a big fan of the glow.
Yeah,
I love it.
I love it for the light. I don't really care for it for the moving background. That's just my taste anyway. But yeah, you can see this running up here. Again, let's see how that looks with a different type of lacquer. So move it to this Kaminrot, or even this Mamba green, which is quite nice.
And also, it's actually great to see the design in motion right now. I mean, I guess that a car is a moving object in the end that you see in the street. So I think it's a big value right now to really judge the happening of the design in motion. Motion means moving your mouse forward. Motion means that the environment is moving. But motion also could mean that the parts of the car itself would move at the moment, such as probably the trunk or the car itself, the wheels. Yeah, basically everything in your virtual world.
Absolutely. So we're coming up to the end of one of my favorite pieces. And this is where firstly, I'm going to turn the light tunnel off in my variant sets here. I'm going to try and be a little bit more flexible here than we would normally be. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the light tunnel. You can see it moves away. Turn off the rear light, and that gets animated out. And now we're going to turn on what we call the LED wall. And this is a very special little environment because at the moment it looks quite static now. I'm going to change to white again. But what we can do is we have actually rendered out the movie that we created originally for Porsche for the deep dive. And now we're using that exact video to light and illuminate the car, as you can see. So just after getting stuck in a camera here, just give me a quick second. Just move into 3/4 front.
So right now we have a movie running on a screen next to a car. And the movie is based on an HTML page. So it's a web movie running an HTML page because this is giving us the best performance. And you can pause and play the movie by just pressing into it. And the movie is not only visible in the reflections. Did I get this right? The movie is also responsible for the entire lighting situation of the scene. So not even the exterior of the car, but even the light situation of the interior of the car. And what I personally just love about this sequence is that it's showing like the entire different options that you also would have in the real world. Because in the real world, if a car is moving from A to B, it is passing a lot of different situations, like urban situations, can be dark, can be bright. And we can see the effect right now here from the movie. So the movie has different parts, bright parts, dark parts, and so on. And we have this kind of inception effect of having the reflection and GI from the movie being visible on the car. So it's
absolutely stunning. I mean, I really have to say that's one of my favorite shots. And I mean, in terms of being calculation intensive, it doesn't get I wouldn't say worse than this, but it doesn't get more challenging than this. And then of course, I mean, I can stop the video. And then, I mean, let's just say I stop it at this stage here where we're doing the perceived quality check on the video in the background. It gets a little bit inception wise here. And then I can change the color to exactly that color. So the Mamba green, and see what the Mamba green looks like when it's lit by itself from a video in a background panel. Absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning. And then for the final hero shot, I'm going to turn on the front light. I'm going to turn on the interior lighting. And we're going to turn on the rear light. So everything here is being lit. It's being rendered in real time. Maybe a little bit too much green. Let me just get that hero shot proper. Let's use the red lighting and move into the white. And that's essentially it.
Cool.
So, I mean, unless, Simon, you've got any desires, anything you'd want to see here, I mean, that's basically the end of the live demo. I know we have a couple of things that we'd like to say in terms of, people will have questions, and they're questions that we've previously gotten from customers when we've presented this live. So we've kind of listed them up as preemptive lists of FAQs. But Simon, from your side, is that everything that you wanted to see? Is that okay for you?
I mean, it's perfectly fine for me. I think the only thing that we also showed in the video was collaboration. So collaboration, of course, is also possible with GPU Raytracing. So, well, if you are using collaboration, it's also possible to use a computer with OpenGL only, and then another computer with CPU or GPU Raytracing, connect them together. And so you also could look through another person's eyes with GPU Raytracing. So just for example, you could use a VR headset on one computer, and you could look through these eyes of the VR headset on the computer which is connected to the GPU Raytracing. So you have a high quality view of what the person in VR is seeing. I have a small comment about VR and GPU Raytracing, and there are good news and bad news at the same time. So technically we have some bad news that the denoiser has a certain limit. So the denoiser technically cannot achieve more than a certain frame rate. So from our point of view, this frame rate was more or less 30 frames per second. And of course, having 30 frames only per second is not really that good if we use it for VR. So the limitation for VR obviously is a denoiser. But if we don't use the denoiser, the image in VR is a little bit noisy. So, well, taking a look at the noisy image, it's okay, but it's probably not what you want to do, and it might be too disturbative. Of course, we can reduce the noise by adding more nodes and GPUs, but we never tested it on how many nodes we would need for GPUs. So that's the bad news. The good news on the other side is GPU Raytracing and VR is working perfectly fine together if we don't work in full GI. So if we work in pre-computed plus reflections, for example, we can benefit from the quality that we have on OpenGL, plus we have the reflections that we get from the ray tracing. So we can make reflection analysis on a ray trace quality. It's not an approximation for reflection, it's actually the real thing. And the other big benefit about using GPU ray tracing for VR instead of OpenGL is just the size of data. I mean, again, technically, we are not limited by the amount of nodes. Well, of course, we are somewhere, but not in a common sense. We tested about 3.5 million nodes. They were running with 60 frames in VR. And you're also not really limited in the poly count. So we tested 350 million polygons in VR, and they were working totally fine with GPU ray tracing and pre-computed plus reflections. So this was one thing that I would say it's definitely worth mentioning. If you have a GPU cluster, if you have VR, just connect it together and take a look at those results yourself. We also, Danny, you just mentioned it, had some other questions that came to us. So one question was, well, what is the performance of multiple cards, RTX cards? So unluckily, well, not unluckily, I mean, we were able to test 8 cards, but we were able to test 8 cards only. So we never tested more than 8 cards in a proper way. So we don't really have benchmarks results for that. Our estimation would be that the scaling would be similar to our CPU scaling. But again, we did not test it yet. I cannot really say a valid judgment for that. We can only say that for 8 cards so far. We are hoping to be able to test more than 8 cards soon. And if we will, we should definitely also produce a little video to showcase the performance of more than 8 cards. And this was also, I answered this twice already in the video, the reason why we fast forwarded some sessions of the screen capturing for the video, for the artificial effect, because we wanted to make 1 minute video only, not a 10-minute video, but also to achieve real times for most of the shots. Another question was, well, what is the limit of the denoiser? So for our test, the limit of the denoiser is around 30 frames. Depends on certain circumstances, but we usually don't achieve more than 30 frames with a denoiser. You also said something about the memory sharing earlier, Danny. So in theory, it's possible to share the memory of multiple RTX cards, but this is not supported by VRED at the very moment. So it depends on the data you're working with. But for this particular model, it made sense for us to work with the RTX 8000 cards because the data set was actually bigger than the RAM that fits the RTX 6000 card. And maybe a question to you, Danny. So what has the biggest impact on the performance for GPU ray tracing?
Well, like any ray tracing, I would say, well, the first and biggest one is the resolution of your image. If you're doing 4K or Ultra HD, that's going to consume more render power and more render efforts. Poly count is, I mean, as a rule of thumb for ray tracing, it doesn't really change the complexity of the rendering. But if you've got 1 billion polygons compared to 10 polygons, obviously you'll see a difference. When we talk about scene complexity, we talk about the amount of lights in the scene, the complexity of the shaders. For example, brush metal is a notoriously difficult material to render cleanly. Yeah, I mean, the amount of lights plays a big role in that for sure.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I would also just add my short summary, just the resolution, the anti-aliasing, shaders, and lighting. I mean, the more pixels you have, the more pixels you have to generate, the slower the result is going to be. So that's probably has the biggest effect on it. And what ways are there to optimize your GPU performance? And this question is not going to be short because there are so many things that you have to consider. And also you have to answer the questions, well, what quality is sufficient for you? Because Danny, if you would right now probably just turn the anti-aliasing off, we have a completely different frame rate. Just the real-time anti-aliasing. If you just turn it to low or off, and if you just move around for now, we have easily 20 frames in this complex scenario. Probably there also the rear light and the headlight on, but I mean, just leave this for now. So basically, the easier the rendering is going to be, the more frames we achieve. So we always have to find a good compromise between the quality that we want to achieve and the hardware that we have, and the frame rate that we at least want to have. And that's the magic triangle in the end that we have to sort out for ourselves. So, but nevertheless, you can change some settings in VRED to make your rendering faster. So if you open your render settings, Danny, please. In your render settings, if we go to the general settings, and if we scroll down, we see options. And we see 2 options here, which are called use ray splitting and use 2-sample MMIS. And these settings can be adjusted for the GPU ray tracing. And easily spoken, if you turn both of those settings off, your rendering is going to be faster. The quality will drop a little bit, but your rendering is going to be faster. The first setting, the use ray splitting, is defining if you split the rays for refraction and reflection. So if you turn the setting up, you randomly choose either one ray for the reflection or for the refraction only, which will make the quality of your glass surfaces a little bit worse, but the performance gain is probably in this scenario, it will be 1 frame. And the use 2-sample MIS is also saving performance because there are 2 ways of actually capturing or getting the information for the environment sampling, and turning this off, you will only use 1 way of doing so. So keep those both settings in mind if you want to optimize your scene and if you want to achieve more frames per second. Another question was, well, as photon tracing is not supported in GPU ray tracing yet, can I create caustics effects? And the answer is definitely yes. Photon tracing is just a way to accelerate the performance and speed of your rendering. Photon tracing will not give you different results in the end. Photon tracing is just another way of approaching the complex topic of light. So we made some tests where we used photon tracing examples in CPU rendering, and we compared it with the GPU ray tracing, and the results in the end were very, very similar. But obviously we need a lot more samples when working with GPU ray tracing instead of working with photon tracing. So photon tracing is not yet implemented into GPU ray tracing, but if you just use more samples, you will achieve similar effects as well. Okay, these were the questions that we have. If you do have more questions, feel free to post them into the YouTube channel over here, or to just reach out to us via LinkedIn or email directly. So from my side, I can just say thanks, Danny, for doing this live demo on your computer, and also thanks for hosting the cluster at your place. I know it's taking your electricity bill probably a bit up. And yeah, thanks from my side, and well, thanks to everybody out there for watching the video. And yeah, take care, stay safe.
Yeah, thanks very much, Simon, and thanks to everybody for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and hopefully we'll be able to see you face to face soon. Thanks a minute. Bye now.